What is the expropriation of the direct producer? Why do laborers accept a nonsensical form of organization that leads to their inevitable exploitation? The answer to this is because they lack direct access to the means of production. The average person doesn't own a mine in which they can harvest ore, or a plant in which that ore can be transformed into a useful product. In fact, only a small portion of the population does. In this way, the world becomes separated into two distinct economic classes: the bourgeoisie, or the ruling class, who controls the means of production, and the proletariat, or the working class, who does not. Contemporary capitalist economists claim there is a middle class between these two classes that accounts for 60% of the population. This, however, is simply a logistical trick that they play that makes it seem as though people aren't as bad off as they really are. The middle class can't be defined by any material difference from the other two classes, whereas the others can be defined by the material difference of the means of production. The middle class is simply defined as the middle 60%. This is why it can always be claimed that 60% of people are middle class. Such a definition makes it impossible for it to be any other way. No matter how bad off people are, 60% of them will be considered middle class, but they still control no means of production, making them actually part of the proletariat. When the means of production are controlled by the direct producer, they combine organically. Take a commune, where farmers grow food for everyone and builders construct shelter for everyone. Each person contributes and each person is provided for. The producers simply make use of the means of production, and the result is self-sufficiency. But this requires them to have a farm, materials, and the tools required to make both useful. Remove the means of production and all you're left with is a community of starving homeless people. Separated from the means of production, the proletariat has only their labor power, which without the means of production is useless. With no access to the facilities, lands, and resources required for production, the proletariat is unable to produce for themselves the food, the shelter, or the other essential products they need to survive. Therefore, in order to gain access to the means of production, the proletariat must rent themselves out as laborers in exchange for a wage that they can use to buy a small portion of what they produce back. Despite the proletariat being responsible for all productive labor, the bourgeoisie alone controls production by owning the means. This allows them to harness labor power without actually doing any labor themselves. Given the proletariat is forced into this arrangement as their only alternative is starvation, and the majority of their labor is done without recompense, this form of organization has often been referred to as wage slavery. Many contemporary capitalist economists argue that this isn't in fact slavery, it's a voluntary contract between those who own the means of production and those attempting to access it. The bourgeoisie, they insist, aren't in the wrong for simply trying to gain something out of the generosity of sharing their property. But this line of thinking is actually a logical fallacy, due to the fact that it doesn't take into account, as Pierre-Joseph pointed out, that property is theft. What right does any one person have over a natural resource or plot of land that any other person doesn't? The universe doesn't bestow property rights upon an individual, so how can someone just say that this forest belongs to them and no one else can grow food there, harvest its wood, or use it as shelter? The only way that this is possible is by obtaining it through force and protecting it with violence. The person who seeks to own the forest must first kill, or otherwise remove, everyone currently occupying it, and then prevent anyone else from doing so. This expropriation is the essential groundwork for capitalism, and historically speaking, is exactly what happened. Nearly all modern civilizations were built by a group of people displacing or exterminating another group of people and claiming the land that they inhabited as their own. This is followed by them establishing a government to rule over it, and a military to enforce its laws. The government then distributes the land and resources to whom it seems fit, thus establishing the class that controls the means of production. Everyone else who is already occupying, born in, or moves to this area then becomes beholden to the new class to survive. This process then continued to take place until eventually, the expropriation that sparked capitalism occurred. After the decline of the English serfdom, the vast majority of the population was comprised of free peasants, who worked for themselves and each other on land that was commonly owned. While enormous baronies could be found throughout England, most of the land consisted of these peasant properties. Resources may have been scarce, but they got to use what they produced rather than most of it going to someone else. Then, seeking to increase their power against the monarchy, the aristocrats unleashed their military might to seize the peasants' land. They used this land to rapidly expand the wool industry, which the now landless peasants had to work in to survive, thus transforming the nobility into the bourgeoisie and the peasants into the proletariat. Now the average laborer in the United Kingdom owns no land at all, and the ones who do don't get nearly enough to undertake production. This expropriation of the direct producer then spread throughout Europe and eventually moved into other continents as well, such as in North and South America, where the European colonizers stole the land and resources from the Native Americans through full-scale slaughter, turning commonly held land into private property, and used that private property to establish various industries. Today, the descendants of those natives are now landless proletariats, forced to sell their labor power to survive. Such expropriation still takes place to this very day as more and more free producers become wage slaves. I hope you enjoyed this video essay on the expropriation of the direct producer. Please consider following for more. Thank you.